This is the story of a children's television clown who traumatized an entire generation. His name is Zeebo, and if you grew up watching Nickelodeon in the 1990s, there's a very good chance you still remember him. It was only the second episode of the show's first season, 24 minutes of television, and that's all it took for Zeebo the Clown to burn himself into the collective nightmares of millions of kids and never leave. To this day, if you ask anyone who watched, "Are you afraid of the dark?" which monster scared them the most, a huge chunk of them will give you the same answer without hesitation. So how did a single episode of a Canadian-produced kids show create one of the most enduring horror icons of the decade? To understand that, you need to understand the show, the people who made it, the actor behind the grease paint, and the surprisingly deep science of why clowns terrify us in the first place. Are You Afraid of the Dark was created by DJ MacHale and Ned Kandel, a horror anthology series aimed at children, which is a pretty bold pitch when you think about it. Nickelodeon thought so too. They initially turned the show down, telling the creators flat out that they couldn't scare little kids. MacHale and Kandel pushed back, and eventually the network gave them a shot. A pilot aired on October 25, 1991, as a Halloween special, performed well enough to earn a series pickup, and officially premiered on the SNCC programming block on August 15, 1992. The show was produced in partnership with a Canadian company called Cineur, and filming took place primarily in Montreal, Quebec, with some additional work done in Richmond, British Columbia. Every episode followed the same format. A group of teenagers called the Midnight Society gathered around a campfire in the woods. One of them told a scary story, and they toss a handful of what they called midnight dust into the fire, which was actually just coffee mate creamer, to make the flames flare up dramatically. Then they'd begin with a line that directly paid homage to Rod Serling and the Twilight Zone, submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society. I call this story. MacHale later confirmed the connection to Vulture, saying they paid homage to Twilight Zone in every single episode. The second episode of the first season was Betty Ann's story, titled The Tale of Laughing in the Dark, and that's where Zeebo enters the picture. The backstory goes like this. In 1924, a circus rolls into town near Playland Amusement Park. One of the clowns, a cigar-smoking character named Zeebo, steals the entire circus payroll of $4,000. When the police give chase, he ducks into the Laughing in the Dark spook house to hide. He almost gets away clean, but while crouching in the dark, he drops his lit cigar, starts a fire, and burns the whole funhouse down with himself trapped inside. Years later, a new Laughing in the Dark rises on the same spot, and at the end of it sits a Zeebo dummy, massive, grinning, yellow teeth, frizzled red hair, a white painted face with hollow, piercing eyes. The episode follows a kid named Josh, who gets dared by his friends to walk into the funhouse. He does it and steals Zeebo's nose right off the dummy. And that's when things go very, very wrong. What makes this episode so effective is its restraint. Zeebo never stomps through the house swinging a weapon. Instead, the show takes its time and lets dread do the work. Josh microwaves some spaghetti, grabs pudding from the fridge, hears a noise, finds nothing there. Then the phone rings and a scratchy, inhuman voice on the other end says, "Give it back." Josh brushes it off as a prank from his friend. Then he walks into the kitchen and finds a spaghetti container filled with cigars. There's a footprint in the spilled pudding on the floor with a letter Z traced into it. A balloon appears reading, "Give it back," and it pops. Josh locks his door, climbs out through his window, sprints back to the funhouse, and returns Zeebo's nose along with a box of cigars as a peace offering. The terror in this episode isn't about what you see, it's about what you don't. The wafting cigar smoke, the footprint, the laugh echoing from somewhere you can't pinpoint. It's the feeling that something is in your house with you, angry and unseen. For a kids' show in 1992, this was remarkably sophisticated horror filmmaking. And then there's the carny outside the funhouse, played by actor Aaron Taggart, delivering his line with a lit cigar in hand. It's the most fun in the park when you're laughing in the dark. The implication being that this guy might actually be Zeebo's ghost. The show never confirms it, just lets the suggestion sit there and fester. Taggart deserves special attention. Born June 30th, 1934, he was an American actor, poet, artist, and sculptor. Most fans of the show know him best as Dr. Vink, one of the series' most iconic recurring characters. But in this episode, he took on a completely different challenge, playing both Zeebo and the Carnival Barker, making it the only time he ever played anyone other than Vink on the show. Taggart passed away on February 28, 2019, at the age of 84, just months before the series was revived for a new generation. Here's where the story grows bigger than one episode of one show. Zeebo didn't just scare kids. There's real evidence suggesting characters like him contributed to a measurable psychological phenomenon, coulrophobia, the clinical fear of clowns. Research published in psychology journals found that in a survey of nearly 1,000 participants across 64 countries, over 53% reported some degree of fear of clowns. A 2016 Vox poll found 42% of respondents were at least somewhat frightened by clowns, and among people aged 18 to 29, that number jumped to 62%. The mean age of onset for coulrophobia is 9 years old, which is not coincidentally right around the age most kids were watching Are You Afraid of the Dark? The science behind it is fascinating. When we see a frightening image as children, the amygdala and hippocampus don't just store the image, they store the entire emotional state we were in at the time. Years later, a similar face or sound can reactivate that same neural pathway, which means you don't just remember the clown, you re-experience the fear. That's why so many adults in their 30s and 40s still feel a chill when they see a picture of Zeebo. It's not only nostalgia, it's a neurological echo. Zeebo also became a kind of unofficial mascot for the show itself. References to him surface across multiple episodes. In The Tale of the Whispering Walls, 2 kids mention seeing him at a fun park. In The Tale of the Mystical Mirror, a girl jokes she'll look like Zeebo if she wears too much lipstick. A video game called Zeebo's Big House turns up in The Tale of the Crimson Clown. A janitor even gets nicknamed Zeebo in The Tale of the Night Shift. When the show was revived in 2019, producers deliberately planted Zeebo Easter eggs throughout the new series for longtime fans to discover. Zeebo wasn't the first evil clown in pop culture. Stephen King published It in 1986. Tim Curry played Pennywise in the TV miniseries in 1990. And the real-world horror of John Wayne Gacy, the serial killer who performed as a clown at children's parties before his arrest in 1978, had already seeded a deep cultural unease. But Zeebo did something none of those others managed. He came for kids specifically, on their channel, during their programming block, in their living rooms, on a Saturday night. And he pulled it off with 24 minutes, a stolen nose, and the smell of cigar smoke drifting through the dark. It's the most fun in the park when you're laughing in the dark. Unless, of course, you pick the wrong door.